just start the YouTube live stream,
Okay.
and I'll go ahead and start the video.
This conference will now be recorded.
Everybody's announcement.
How you doing?
Good.
Good to see you.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
One of my best friends is a KU grad, just all the time. It's the only thing I own. They're pretty enjoyable to watch.
So the Wildcats,
Yeah.
didn't have that on, should. I could say that could be a conflict.
Whenever I see his email, Nancy would think, oh,
Well, the clock shows 6 o'clock, so suppose we should call this meeting to order. Roll call?
Manson?
Here. Here?
Lane?
Here.
Milborn?
Here.
Schultz?
Here.
Huggins? Mr. Chairman, it appears Commissioner Manson and Huggins are absent.
Okay. First item of general business, approve the planning commission agenda. Changes, corrections you want to make to that?
Make a motion, we approve the agenda?
Second?
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Next item of general business would be approval of the minutes of the planning commission meeting held April 25th, 2023. Did anyone see any corrections or changes that should be made to those?
I think I got two.
Okay.
First one was on the motion of the landscaping. It's right on the last page. Brandon, I think it was motion by Commissioner Manson.
Oh, yeah.
I think, I don't remember.
It was you, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Commissioner Manson.
And then just, I guess, a minor one. Page 6, motion by Councilmember Lane. I think that's probably just a carryover, but I think it should be Commissioner Lane. But that's kind of minor.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
That could cause confusion. And Brandon, I had one on page 5. I think we were discussing the golden criteria, not the golden rule.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Any other changes or corrections? Someone like to make a motion?
Make a motion that we accept the minutes with the proposed changes.
Second?
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Minutes are approved. Item C, disclosure of conflicts of interest. Anyone have any conflicts they wish to disclose on tonight's agenda? Seeing none. Item D would be disclosure of outside communications regarding commission business. Anyone have anything to report? I received a call from Mike Caldwell on the sand plant. We talked a little bit about some of his concerns, but other than that, that's the outside communications. None others? Okay. At this time, we'll move to call to the public. Members of the public who wish to address the planning commission regarding items not on the agenda tonight may do so at this time. Any presentations for informational purposes, no action will be taken, and there is a 4-minute time limit. Would anyone like to address the planning commission on matters not on the agenda tonight? Is there anyone online we need to worry
Yes,
about?
Mr. Chair, we do have one participant online, Paul Oberly. If you want to make comment now, you can unmute and provide those comment. Otherwise, don't. Thanks.
Yeah, Mike, this is Paul Oberly with IPI. I'm just attending, listening in on behalf of SSOE, who's going to be, there's a discussion on the topic on the Phase 3 site plan. So I was just listening in for that.
Understood, Paul.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Just a note to the public, there was a gentleman that sat through the entire meeting, last meeting, only to find out the agenda item that he wanted to speak on was not on the agenda. So if you haven't seen the agenda, I would suggest that you read it. Otherwise, you're going to be here the whole meeting, which is more than fine by us. But if you don't want to, I would check.
Good tip. Darrell, you want to say something?
I've talked to.
I'm sorry, Darrell, would you mind approaching the podium, give us name and address?
I don't know. My name is Darrell Zimmerman. I live at 34055 West 86th Terrace in DeSoto. I own land down on the floodplain off of Gardner Road. But what my concern is that I donated 14 acres to the Friends of the Caw for a campground. And if they can do all of their getting their sand from a dredge pit on the land, that's fine. But if they, I'm totally against them dredging out of the river, because what used to be a beautiful sandbar there, now there's a 15 to 20 foot drop off straight down. And so that would ruin that and eat it away. So that's my biggest concern. And there's a gentleman by the name of Teager, last name. Is he present? No? Well, I can handle this letter. He had to do with the Pike Road and its vacancy and so forth. So anyway, I have pictures of the floodplain area, and it's goes back to what was available, what people lived where, and the roads and so forth that were on the Cedar Junction area. We call it Corliss area or Cedar Junction, or it's east of town and off of Gardner Road. So if anyone would like a copy of this, I'll be glad to share it with them. All right, that's it.
Thanks, Joe. Again, anyone else have comments they would like the planning commission to hear? Not on items for the agenda tonight. At this time, then I'll close the call to the public, and we'll move to our first public hearing item, number 5A, rezoning 3 acres of property in the vicinity of 79th and Gardner Road from RO to M1.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. What you have before you is a 3-acre tract. It's being requested to be rezoned from rural suburban to M1. The reason for this, and we'll get into this on the next agenda item, as you've correctly pointed out several times, we were just talking about the land use and the change in zoning, but they're kind of grouped together, so we just need to keep an eye on the next agenda item. The reason we put the rezoning first was because if Planning Commission made a recommendation for denial, it would probably be best not to do anything with the the batch plant issue. So that's why we're going to go through the process for the public hearing on the rezoning request from RO to M1. And the reason it's the proposed use for special use permit for concrete batch plant, it's not considered a mining operation per the NAICS codes. It's actually a manufacturing operation. You're actually making concrete. They're not mining anything. They're just bringing in the sand, the rock, and the lime and mixing it on the site. So in order to do that, you have to have a special use permit to do that. Even though the sand plant is in the RO district and it is operating under a special use permit, we do allow it in the RO district, but the batch plant cannot be operational without a special use permit in M1. Anyway, moving on, the property is owned by Dave Penny, who is the owner of Caw Sand, but is leased to Ham Companies. The current zoning map on page 2 does show the area to be rezoned. You can see it's all rural suburban in that area, and then north of 79th Street is all light industrial. As of the date of this memo, we have discussed this matter with several residents. Most of them are concerned about the batch plant. The issue of the rezoning didn't seem to create too much concern, but once again, these are kind of interconnected, but we're going to focus entirely on the rezoning at this point. The existing or the surrounding aerial shows the use of the sand plant as shown on Johnson County Ames. You can see some of the uses nearby. It's mostly agricultural. The carriage houses are on 83rd and Gardner Road. There is some residential on Corliss Road, and then it curls off into 82nd Street. But the area is primarily agriculture in nature. And then I guess to address Darrell's comment, the sand plant's no longer operating out of the Kansas River, so they are now back on the site here at 79th and Gardner Road, right across from the railroad tracks. Reviewing of the zoning compatibility factors, character of the neighborhood, stated the area is primarily agricultural. It is in mining to the east of the proposed zoning. The railroad tracks are to the south. I do believe that the change in zoning would be appropriate to M1, since there is also quite a bit of M1 in this area as well. Our future land use plan, and I'll talk about that a little later, does show that area being M1. So that's it's consistent with what we proposed in the future. The proposed zoning would create a pocket of M1, but as I stated, the areas north of 79th Street are all M1, and it is consistent with the future land use plan. Suitability of the uses which the property is restricted under its existing zoning. This tract could not be put to use under the RO category if as a concrete batch plant, even with a special use permit. So that's why there's the consideration for a change. If it were going to be an expanded sand plant, we could do that, and that actually is part of the existing SUP, which once again we'll talk about the next agenda item. The site has been vacant since it's been annexed in the city of DeSoto, so it has been under an agricultural use until now, or proposed now. The extent which there's a need in this community, one thing that when I've talked about the applicant and just thinking about all the changes that's going through DeSoto, it is kind of a bricks and mortar type operation. These uses are prevalent all through and around Johnson County and Douglas County. DeSoto's a growing community, and having access to ready-mix concrete would be beneficial. The adequacy of utilities, this is something that's a little bit of a tricky area or a sticking point. The public, fire, police, parks, things like that, there's going to be no impact. Electricity is available, but there is no potable water main to this area, and there is no paved roads. The Gardner Road, in fact, Gardner Road is actually maintained by the applicant, so that's when we get in the SUP, we will talk about that, but there are some issues that need to be cognizant of about a lack of utilities that serve this area. As far as parking, things like that, all parking would be on site. There actually wouldn't be any parking. There'd be very few employees. It's really just trucks loading concrete, delivering materials, and leaving. So there isn't going to be any kind of retail sales where people can just drive up and park and or do whatever they need to do to get some concrete. It's all a delivery type system. The rezoning of the property would not have a significant impact on the environment, certainly no greater than the SUP, which actually the mining SUP, which is underneath this one, so to speak. So there really wouldn't be any significant change to the use of, or to the environment in this area that's not already being proposed. Allowing uses, the economic impact, allowing uses that doesn't currently exist will provide some additional economic activity in DeSoto. And there's no really extent with, there may be some detrimental effects because the residents that are nearby or within the 200-foot area are on the south side of the railroad tracks, and they don't use Gardner Road to access their property or anything like that. So I don't see that there would be any significant issues with those residents. Would there be anything to gain from these residents by denying this request? Once again, don't see there'd be any advantage to denying it either. I just don't see that there's much impact on either the rezoning area or the residents that are within the 200-foot area. As I had mentioned, the proposed use is consistent with the future land use plan, and then based on the golden criteria, staff does recommend approval of this rezoning request. I did include all the zoning districts, and then you can see what is allowed by right. And one thing that I always like to point out is when you go to changing a zoning category, even though we've got a proposed use on the next agenda item, we are actually approving potentially every use that's in the M1 category in this area. One thing to point out, it's also in a floodplain, and so that kind of limits a lot of things that could go in there under the M1 category. However, just wanted to point out that you do have to look at all the potential permitted uses in the M1 district. So that, Mr. Chairman, concludes my staff report. If you have any questions, I'll certainly make myself available.
Any questions for staff?
Utilities was a finding that was negative on your,
Yeah, the utilities was the
What's,
sort of biggest negative, but
yeah, how's that planning on being tackled? Who's responsible for that, I guess?
well, it's an interesting area down there. Like, for instance, the gun club, which is very far on the north side, they use wells for their water system. These folks, the proposed use, they initially said they'd have 10 to 15 employees, which sort of set up the flag that you're going to need some potable water. They've since sort of revised that. I think there'll be quite a few less than that. I will say that the sand operation, the scale house, there's 2, maybe 3 employees, and they have just a portable restroom system, and they do bring in potable water for drinking and things like that. So that's how that's handled currently, and if they're in that sort of 1 to 2 to maybe 3 employees on site, we'd probably see something consistent. But initially, we'd seen a greater intensity of employee use and thought that utilities.
Would that meet our TCO or C of O requirements to have potable water in containers and restroom facilities and things like that?
Well, the restrooms would be, in this instance, would likely be, like I said, portable ones. So it's up to the applicant to rotate those out and pay for those.
The question before the commission is whether or not it's an appropriate use for the property to be designated as an M1.
Correct.
And it's clearly a negative factor in that there is not water utilities to the property. So it's a negative factor.
Correct.
Any other questions for Brad?
You know, the part of that I had said a septic system would be needed to be constructed, but with all the sand and stuff there and the water pit for the sand plant right next door, to me, if you put a septic system in, that's eventually gonna mitigate into that water that they're dredging, and to me, it would be a contamination issue.
Well, that certainly is part of what our building inspector would look at, but once again, the gun club does have a septic system on their property, so, and seems to be operating. I did talk to Cameron about it. He doesn't have any issues with the septic system in this area, provided it meets design criteria.
Brad, would this be the only M1 that we actually have approved north of 83rd Street?
Yeah, this is the only rezoning request we've had north.
So we haven't done any others. We've got on our future land use map as being appropriate for that, but it's
Correct,
never done
yes.
one here. Okay.
You said primarily truck traffic, heavy truck traffic, I would assume. Is
Mm-hmm.
it more than what's there today, or is there gonna be more,
Yeah, I think it's important not to conflate this agenda item with the next.
Oh,
And it's hard to
So,
do because
It's
they're
hard.
interconnected.
Right. We have this conversation a lot. On the rezoning, we have to consider all possible uses in that M1 zoning. That's why Brad put that appendix, with the table of all uses. So when we look at utilities, some uses in M1 would not at all fit, right?
Okay.
And at that time, there's another step. Some of the uses require a special use permit, which is on the agenda. Some just require a site plan. So at that time, we would look at a 12-story office building and say, no way, you're in the floodplain, you don't have sewer, you don't have water, we can't approve a site plan. But other uses in the M1 district might be appropriate. So that's why some of these golden criteria are negative, and that's also why you don't have, it's not a scorecard on the golden criteria as to whether you should approve or not. So yeah, when we talk about truck traffic, those are very appropriate discussions. And in general, the road network that doesn't really exist to this particular tract. So again, that's another detail that will be taken up at site plan or with the next agenda item. So.
What is the access to this site right now? How would you get to it?
Well, the proposed access will be past the scale house, which is where the road is to the river access point for recreational purposes, so it just extend to the west, and that would have to be built.
Yeah, so the site right now is not a separate parcel.
No.
So the parent parcel technically has access off of 79th Street.
But if this is a separate parcel, it won't.
Right.
Well,
But it doesn't create a parcel.
Yeah,
We can
this doesn't create
rezone
a
portion
parcel.
of
Yeah, I understand.
the larger parcel.
That's my question. Why isn't the whole parcel being rezoned in one?
Because they don't need a batch plan on the whole parcel.
Okay.
So it's really focused on just the operational location on their next agenda.
Yeah, and then also, we're getting into that, like I said, the special use permit, but the SUP that was approved in 2017 does show how the road network would work to get around to this location, but all the way up to the northern parts of the site as well, or this whole area, the Cedar Junction area.
Any other questions for Brad?
I guess my only concern on is asking about the 3-acre rezoning. I didn't see a legal, I think the legal that they submitted was for the whole tract.
Yeah, and we're working on that, Jets, and we talked about that, but we're gonna get that squared away, the exact legal area.
Okay. And I guess my only other question, just from my own knowledge, what NISC classification would this be under?
Let me go find that. It is actually a manufacturing use.
Okay.
So I think it was 327 were the first.
Yeah, 327 is the one that's highlighted.
Yeah, that's it. Non-metallic mineral product manufacturing, that's it.
All right, thank you.
If there are any other questions at the moment, this is a public hearing item. So I would open the public hearing and invite members of the public who wish to speak on this item to address us at the podium, give us your name and address, and we'll take your comments.
Excuse me, we're gonna get another shot at the Next agenda item.
Yeah, for clarity, this item is a determination of the appropriate zoning for this 3-acre tract. It has not the same issues that we will have with whether or not that permitted use is actually gonna be appropriate. But it does the first threshold. We have to be able to rezone it.
But it's the next agenda item tonight.
Yeah. Okay, seeing no one rushing the podium, I close the public hearing on this item and the matters before the planning commission to discuss.
I guess kind of like Brad was saying, I mean, this is in a floodplain. And if you do look through all the other potential uses, you know, in the N1 zoning, you know, with the floodplain, utilities, not very accessible to the site, there's a lot of stuff that is, you know, kind of limited. That could be, you know, built at this site. You know, it is on the future land use plan to be M1 zoning, and I think it is a good location for that type of zoning, you know, with the buffer of the railroad and then the river to the north, then the existing use to the east. And then City of Olathe actually has those wells on the east side of Gardner Road, so in my opinion, I kind of agree with staff on their report. I think it'd be a good use for this location, or zoning use.
Conceptually, I don't have a problem with the way that it, that it's laid out. It's what we have intentions of doing with it. So,
My concern, and I suppose this comes up anytime you have a rezoning that's maybe new in an area, is it's hard for me to envision saying that it's an appropriate use when you don't have a road network and utilities that can support it. And, you know, Gardner Road and 83rd Street are problems. And I know that we have a future land use designation for M1 in that area, but it just strikes me as a little odd that we would do this without having something in place for those services or improvements to be made. Sure, we can address that as part of site plans and those things in the future, but maybe I'm thinking about it wrong, but it does seem like before you designate it as being an appropriate zone for that property, those are very relevant. And I know the staff said the finding was neutral with regard to the road network, but that road network's a problem down there.
I do think the existing zoning north of 79th is M1.
I thought he said we didn't have any M1 down there yet. I think we just designated it.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, north of 79th Street, that whole area is actually M1.
All right, so we have done it there.
Well, we didn't, I guess not recently. I mean, that's been M1
Okay.
for as long as I can recall.
Well, I mean, I suppose that mitigates against the concern to the extent we've already got a large landmass that's M1.
Yeah.
We're not setting a tone.
Right. So it is established there.
Okay, that's, thank you, I appreciate the clarification.
I just kind of have an issue with putting M1 in that area with the proximity to the river. Not just, or not this particular use that's on the next item, but there's a lot of things that would be permitted that I don't know that I would feel comfortable having in that area.
But I think, like I was saying, John,
Utilities is another issue, and the roads,
I think a lot of those uses that are listed there due to the floodplain, I mean, if you look at the flood depth, it could be 9 foot deep when the river gets up. So a lot of those uses that you're potentially concerned about would not potentially go there anyways because of that flood issue.
For my own education, special use permit, does it carry the 327 designation? As in, we're only allowing the M1 for this particular NAICS designation?
So
Or
the
is
M-
it applicable for everything?
Yeah, the M1 would be applicable for anything.
Okay.
their particular use would be a special use permit that's tailored to their use.
So if it was ever to change, it would have to go through another process. Would that be correct?
Well, unless they wanted to do one of these things permitted without a special use permit,
Okay.
which I think the point's been made, is that it is floodplain and building permanent structures down there probably would never get approved anyhow.
It's more difficult.
Right, you gotta raise it. Any other discussion? I'd like to make a motion.
Make a motion, we recommend approval of rezoning the 3 acres of property in the vicinity of 79th and Gardner Road from RO to M1.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Roll call?
Maddock,
Yes?
Templin,
Yes.
Lane,
Yes.
Milburn,
Yes.
Schultz.
No.
Motion carries.
Okay, next item on the agenda is to consider a special use permit for a concrete batch plant at the vicinity of 79th and Gardner Road.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You have, commissioners, you all have a fairly significant amount of information to digest from the staff report. We started these discussions with the applicant actually in February about expanding the area to include a concrete batch plant. And so the first step of the process was to look at what was allowed under the existing special use permit that was granted. Actually, there was a first permit that was granted in 1997, and then there's been a few iterations in between, but the most recent SUP that was approved by the Planning Commission, ultimately the City Council, or recommended by the Planning Commission and approved by Council, was in 2017. Just perfunctory stuff. We did send out notification letters to 1,000-foot radius because special use permit requires a 1,000-foot notification area. So there's a lot more individuals that were notified about the public hearing for the potential concrete batch plant. I'm going to go with a couple of things that were in 2017 that the Planning Commission considered and ultimately approved with the terms of the SUP included. There, we went through a fairly significant reclamation plan that needed to be completed when the sand and gravel operation ceases. There would be no rock crushing, asphalt, concrete mixing allowed. $10,000 annual Parks and Rec fees paid to the city of DeSoto. They have continually paid that and haven't had any issues with that. Truck traffic was restricted to a half hour before sunrise and half hour after sunset, and there would be no Sunday operations. And of course, all state and federal permits need to be granted and remain in effect. And the one thing that's actually rather important to this this project was all the timber on the west side of the Kansas River to remain, just in case we don't, it needs to have that, strength that the roots and the trees hold that sandbar, sand edge in place to keep the river on its current course. And then, of course, commercial fish farming was not going to be allowed. One of the, more unusual things about this is that the Cause Sand is actually maintaining Gardner Road. They maintain from 83rd Street and Gardner Road to the southeast corner of their property at 7605 Gardner Road. So they have to oil it and gravel it or take a motor grader out, smooth it out. They have been doing their work on that. They have to do that twice a year. Maximum trips is capped at 115 a day, and they can only be operated, once again, 6 days a week. Cost Sand is required to dedicate the Pike Road easement, and that's actually north of the location we're talking about. But at some point, there's a time frame where the sand plant will expand and we would actually close 79th Street. So we had to maintain or get an access point all the way up to the northern parts of that site. And they're required to dedicate road easement to the city of DeSoto. Also, if the sand plant expands, acceleration and decelerations on 83rd Street, need to be installed when it goes beyond its Phase 1 limits, and they are right now at the edge of the Phase 1 limits. So that's something that staff is pretty adamant about, that the acceleration, deceleration lanes need to be included before the concrete batch plant begins operation. Another important point was 100-foot excavating setback from the city of Olathe raw water lines. Those are actually just north of the railroad. The applicant has conversed with the city of Olathe, and we did get a letter on Monday from the city of Olathe iterating their concerns. Also, as part of the SUP, and this didn't get completed prior to the staff reports going out on Thursday, but they do have a requirement for a citizen participation program. They have met with, once again, the city of Olathe and a lot of the residents that were affected or in the 1,000-foot buffer area, which is part of the reason, I'm skipping ahead, but we're recommending that keep the public hearing open, and we'll take public comment, planning commissioner comment. We'll come back and address those comments and then bring a final recommendation to the planning commission at our next meeting. So there's still some things that need to be resolved, and that's just one of them. We're just still getting some information back that we need to get into the staff report and ultimately to the planning commissioners. Since the notifications were distributed, I've had several discussions with residents in the area about the proposal. I've listed several of the concerns that were raised. One of them is the proposed hours of operation, which will begin at 2 a.m. during summer months. The reason for that is they need to have the concrete ready at 5, 6 in the morning when the trucks are rolling out to the job site. Obviously it gets hot, so you need to pour the concrete when it's as cool as possible. So there is certainly a opening or a time frame which does change significantly from just the sand operation itself. There's concern about the noise of the operation of the batch plant. There was discussions of reducing the speed potentially on 83rd Street from the bridge at Cedar Creek to Corliss Road. Also, the acceleration, decelerations were something that were pretty important. The people I spoke to, actually the paved Gardner Road, that's a city staff concern. That was actually, should have been moved in its entirety, and it is down in the section D, staff concerns. Certainly overall truck traffic loads, the amount of traffic is being proposed. They want to increase to 175 trips a day versus 115, and a trip is 1 in and 1 out. So it actually would be, 2 trips, so to speak, or like I said, 1 in and 1 out. And once again, there's concerns about the intersection, the sight lines on 83rd Street, and should there be designated truck routes through town. We don't want them going up Corliss Road or Waverly or things like that, or cutting over on 95th Street, things like that. So the sort of the logical routes would be 83rd Street and then to Lexington through town, or north on K10 and then, or north on Kill Creek to K10, and restricting that. So those are things that certainly you can consider. Ultimately, City Council has purview over these items, but those were issues that were raised during these conversations that I had. Of course, the things that staff is concerned about is the deceleration lanes. Chet and I are pretty strongly wanting to have those in before the operations begin for the batch plant. We also felt like the situation where the applicant or the batch plant owner is maintaining a public road, thought that was something that probably needs to change, but we would like to see Gardner Road paved from 79th to 83rd Street, and then the city would take over maintenance from then on. And then we did talk about the potable water being extended to the site for utility usage. So ultimately, the ask for the applicant is to how the batch plant is concerned with the extended hours. They're not asking for rock crushing or anything like that. It's just the actual mixing and the support activities for the batch plant itself. They're asking for extended hours of operation beginning potentially at 2 a.m., 7 days a week. They want to increase the truck visits from 115 to 175 per day with consideration for seasonal usage, because obviously during spring, summer, and fall, there'll be more opportunities to pour concrete in the winter, their operations will be decreased significantly. So it's more of an average per year that they would be around the 175 versus a hard number daily. And then they're willing to construct the acceleration, deceleration, and I didn't add this note, but they would like to begin the operations at the batch plant and then construct them sort of concurrently while the batch plant is opening, so they can start operations of the batch plant sooner. And then they'd like to have the SUP extended for both the 2017 special use permit to meet the day that the council potentially approves the batch plant operations. So they would have 10 years of batch plant operations and 10 years of sand plant operations. So with that, that concludes the staff report. I'll stand for any questions you may have. The applicant has asked to make a presentation. They have supplied a PowerPoint. So if Mr. Chairman, you'd like to have them proceed with that, or if you'd like to have staff questions, we could do that. But I did tell them they would have an opportunity to present their information.
Thank you. If any preliminary questions?
I have two, Brad. The acceleration and deceleration lanes, does it show in here how long they're going to be?
Yeah, that is kind of buried in the traffic study, and so I don't know if there's a distance on there or not. I don't know, Chad, if you recall, I'll let you handle all the traffic study information.
You mean, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, 150 feet is the minimum length on that plus taper.
Chet, was there anything about the eastbound left turn lane? Was that going to be a requirement that was stated in the traffic study?
Yeah, so their traffic study recommended left turn lanes in and a right turn lane in, so.
Okay.
Yep.
So that would be included on that first phase too?
Yep.
That- Okay,
Prior to start of operations.
okay.
You mentioned, Brad, that the city of DeSoto had written a letter, or I'm sorry, not DeSoto, Olathe wrote a letter that delivered on Monday. Did I miss what their concern? I know that. the
Yeah, well,
100-foot
they've got
setback-
actually their water lines, their raw water lines up to their plant on the top of 83rd Street are, it's actually, Mike, I think it's actually a couple slides up. Yeah, well, yeah, you can see them right there as well, but they're right there between the railroad tracks and the potential use. And with that previous special use permit granted in 2017, they wanted to have a 100-foot buffer. And the applicant has agreed to maintain that 100-foot buffer between their raw water main.
Oh, that's a 100-foot buffer from the water line, not the wells.
Correct, yes.
Okay, is there a buffer on the wells that they mentioned?
Well, the wells, actually, the city of Olathe owns their property that the wells are on. So
Okay.
that's really not affected by this.
Okay. So is there, this, so I'm clear too, is they got one special use permit for the whole property, then they're wanting to overlay another special use permit for the batch plant over that? Is that how that's gonna work?
In essence, yes.
Okay.
And so the only thing that the city of Olathe said is you have to maintain the 100-foot buffer that was already agreed upon in 2017. Is that essentially the punchline?
Yeah, it is. Chet, you can speak to that. I mean, they did address, I think, the letter to Chet on that, but, and the applicant also has had meetings with the city of Olathe as part of their citizen participation plan. So I guess they can expand upon their direct conversations they had with the city of Olathe.
Well, if the commission's comfortable, I think probably ought to let the applicant speak.
Okay?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Patrick Watkins. I'm an attorney. I represent the Ham Companies. Our team is with me today. Bob Rawls, Tim Zenda, Ryan Blosser, Tanner Higgins, and Austin Quick is with Blackstone Environmental. This is the group that's responsible for the application before you. I should recognize, Brad, before I get too far along, these special use permits are a bit technical, tedious. He's reviewed a lot of information. He's been transparent with us. He's been courteous and accessible, and he's done a nice job. I appreciate his support on the rezoning. I appreciate his review, and I think we can agree with his overall recommendation that you guys give this another month. We can work out the finer details with the staff. I'm sure there's common ground here. But we'd like to share with you a little bit about our operations, about what this application is about. And obviously, we're excited to be here. You guys have more than a little bit of growth ahead of you, and we're aware of that. Our customers are telling us that, and this sort of resource can help. We may speak a little bit fast. There's a lot to cover here. I will address Mr. Zimmerman's question. I know Brad already hit it, but we have no intention of dredging on the river. This is all an inland dredging operation, starting kind of at the furthest south location. We've got a laser pointer here. So we took over operations for Dave Penny's Sahara Sand and Master Dredging operations in 2021. The river dredging was discontinued last year, and we currently run an inland dredging operation, which you can see on an aerial here. If you look really closely, you can see the dredging boat right there, which is shown in a bigger picture over here. This is operating today pursuant to an old special use permit. We've met with some neighbors. I think it was a surprise to a lot of people that we are dredging there currently. It doesn't make a lot of noise, and we'll tell you a bit about the operations. The current product offerings are primarily concrete sand and asphalt sand. These are the type of sands that have to meet specifications. We also produce some byproduct filler sand that gets sold occasionally. Next slide. There are a number of special use permits out in this area. The sand extraction pit permits date back to 1987, 1999, 2010, 2011. Most recently in 2017, as Brad described, this is the blue area that we're talking about today. And I think it's still a point of some discussion with the planning staff about how we layer these special uses. I think it's better to have just one special use. If it were up to us, I think we'd have one big special use permit and it runs for 10 years. Part of the reason we're here is because this was approved in 2017, but it never got off the ground. We have approval to dredge in this area, but we haven't needed to yet. We'd like to start that 10-year term, have the security of 10 years so that we can get this batch plant and the investment taken care of and have a nice long 10-year term. There's enough sand out there that to the extent this is approved, there will be more requested approvals. This is a key resource and sort of a key area. But you can see some of the other things going on in this area. This is subject to some of the old special use permits. It's a much larger area. We're not really talking about that today, but that's where our current operations are. The green areas are what City of Olathe owns. They do have wells, they have monitoring wells, they have a pipeline. All of these facilities are quite important to them. We reached out to them early on in the process. I'll talk about that. Generally speaking, this is a unique area north of the railroad. It's been dedicated to special industrial type uses for 40+ years. I'm going to have Tim Zenda talk about the demand here. We'll have Bob Rawls talk about the operations, and I'll conclude with some final thoughts. You can go to the next one.
My name's Tim Zenda. I'm the Vice President of the Ready Mix business for Ham. Our Ready Mix concrete footprint is comprised of approximately 20 locations in northeast Kansas, as you can see, and into western Missouri and central Missouri there in Columbia. We do business under 3 brand names: Concrete Supply Topeka, Builder's Choice, and Concrete Materials Company, depending on where you're at there. Most of our concrete operations are west and south of the area. What led us being here this evening are the repeated requests by our customers to establish operations in the area to satisfy a local need for concrete supply. As we have studied the market, we have become increasingly comfortable that the need does truly exist, and it'll only grow as the economy expands here locally. At this relatively central location, with the sand available on site, this is a natural location for a batch plant, through our lens. We should be very clear that this is designed to serve local growth, local projects, whether they be commercial in nature, residential in nature, private. Our intent isn't to service the Panasonic project through this location. The Panasonic project has recently erected their own on-site portable batch plant to service the project needs, as I know you probably are well aware, if you would. So this here is a picture of the plant that we'd like to set up down in the 3-acre parcel identified. Over to the right, you'll see 2 silos. Those contain both fly ash and cement. They're vented on top through bag houses. Moving across the picture to the left, you've got what we would call the central drum in between or under the second silo. And the plant body going left, ag scale, and ag bins. And the ag bins are fed by those 3 conveyors and a front-end loader. In terms of scope of what we'd be doing, we'd be feeding the plant with a front-end loader and loading ready-mix trucks, which I know everybody's familiar with. The plant is a portable plant. It's a Rex Model S, and those silos are roughly 60 foot to the top. That might be a hair long. So with that, I'll pass it to Bob.
Good evening. My name is Bob Rawls. I'm the Director of Geology for HAM. You know, Pat mentioned this site is unique, and because we know it's unique, we have applied some site selection criteria to determine if a project like this is viable. So I'd just like to share to you some of those criteria. First one is we want a location that's close to the raw material resource, primarily being sand and coarse aggregate. As you know, at this site, we're blessed because the sand is right there on site. So we can save costs and extend that on to our customers. The other one is limestone, and there are local quarries in the area that we can get limestone into there fairly readily. Criterion number 2 is the project site needs safe road access. And this site has not only safe road access, but safe sight lines. And this site has a well-established hauling route from 83rd and Gardner. The third one is we want buffers from the nearby residences. Map on the right shows that the batch plant and the future sand extraction boundary are a significant distance from residential uses. Map also shows the location of the railroad, which provides a unique buffer bound on each side by tree lines. And as Commissioner Milborn mentioned earlier, there's also the city of Olathe has some industrial uses that borders the east and the west side of the property. So we're fortunate there. Criteria number 4 is we want proximity to market. And as you know, this site is within DeSoto proper, so we're fortunate there. And criteria number 5 is once you get all those past those 4 criteria, we need to get land use rights or own the land. And as has been mentioned, we're fortunate we have a lease with Dave Penny, who owns a large contingent of land, as you see outlined in white here on the screen. So for these noted reasons, we feel this is a site is exceptionally well suited for the existing sand operation and proposed batch plant. A little bit about the dredging operations. You know, as Pat mentioned, we operate here currently. In basic terms, our sand dredging operation consists of some basic processes. We remove the clay overburden to get down to the water table. And once we get to the water table, we put on a floating pontoon boat, which is uniquely equipped. We dip a pipe into the sand deposit, and through that pipe, we convey sand and water slurry to a pipeline, through the pipeline to a nearby processing plant where the sand is screened and sorted to different sizes and stockpiled. Material is then weighed as it leaves the scale house to the different customer destination points. I also want to mention that this plant is a closed-loop water system, so we use the water from the pit and recirculate it. There is no discharge off-site. And because it is a wet processing plant, we have minimal dust through this operation. As far as the site plan, this is in the packet, or I should say approved in the 2017 special use permit. Just some quick call-outs here. We're currently operating in the gray area. The site plan has been mentioned, calls for berms and 100-foot setback. The site plan shows the maximum allowable excavation limits. You know, in fact, there are many conditions associated with this conditional use permit, and you know, Pat and Brad have talked about that. Many people are interested in reclamation, so I wanted to share that Ham takes a particular point of pride in land reclamation, and we have been recognized through state and federal awards outlined here on the site throughout Kansas. The Kansas Department of Ag is the agency that regulates reclamation. And for this particular site, the reclamation plan is called for an inland recreational lake. Of course, the final reclamation will kind of depend on what portions are actually mined. With that, if you have any questions related to what I provide or anybody else, I do provide an open invitation. If anybody ever wants to tour the site, see some of our reclamation, I'm happy to coordinate that. Well, I guess. Oh, I have one more slide. So while we're here tonight, our batch plant, of course, our rezoning application is about the ability to site a batch plant. So which requires special zoning of M1, from RO to M1. And so on the left, just provided here, is an area outlined in purple, which shows a small area of about 3 acres that we are requesting to rezone. If you look on the right, this map shows the proposed site plan and traffic flow at the concrete batch plant. Basically, it kind of consists of this. Trucks will access and leave the site through our dedicated gated points along Gardner Road. Site operations for the batch plant generally consist of aggregate storage bunkers, aggregate feed bins, material conveyors, batch mixing, and batch operator house and parking. A front-end loader, common to most construction sites, will feed the aggregate bins from the storage bunkers. Once the material is loaded into the feed bins, an automated process conveys the material to the mixing bin and storage silos. The trucks will pull through the circular drive and are loaded at the batch plant. The operation will be powered by electric line. There is electricity out there, and we have talked to Evergy to extend that onto this rezoning area. So the loudest noise to be heard will be vehicle traffic, and the front-end loader, similar to the existing sand operation.
Thanks, Bob. I'll talk a little bit about the neighborhood participation. I'll make it quick. The SUP process requires that we send out a notice to everyone within 1,000 feet of the border of the property. We did so. We sent a letter, and we did receive some calls. We met on site with a couple people. We responded by email to a number of people. We met with City of Olathe. Olathe had 4 concerns, but their letter does say if these conditions can be met, we support the application. Those 4 concerns were outlined before. 3 of them are from 2017, which are easy to meet: access to wells, access to monitoring equipment, protect the easement area. The 4th one is to get access to the wells on the west through our site. It's easy to grant, and we've agreed to it. So I think Olathe will be satisfied, and they will support the application, considering those conditions being met. We have heard from a number of neighbors, a lot of questions about whether Corliss Road will be used, some questions about sound, some questions about noise and dust. And we did our best to answer those. I think one of the best things that we can say right now is come out and listen to it. We are dredging out there right now. We do have an operation going. It is stockpiling. You can drive right up 83rd Street, Gardner Road, and you can hear it from as close to the property as you want. And if you want to call Bob, you can go out there and take a look. It's not the sort of sound that you might equate with mining. It's not sort of sound that you might equate with blasting. This is a wet operation. It doesn't create the sort of dust that the limestone quarries might. Next slide. We went through the exercise of identifying all the conditions from the previous use permits. We're willing to adopt those almost entirely. We do have a couple of minor adjustments, but before I talk about the adjustments, these conditions are noted in the staff report, but groundwater protections, water monitoring, erosion control, street improvements, maintenance, access, security fences, future uses, access, fertilizer, reclamation. All of those things I think we're fine with. We'll be willing to adopt it. You went through a public process before. We're happy to not recreate the wheel there. The adjustments that we're asking for, like Brad had mentioned, is to open earlier. the early time, as Brad mentioned, is just critical in the hottest times of the year. There are times when it's so hot that to serve the construction community, it just requires that we open earlier. We're open to a discussion on all these things, though. We'd be happy to respond to any questions related to that. As Brad mentioned, we'd like to increase the average trips per day to 175 once those construction of the road improvements is completed. Again, happy to discuss that in our thinking there. We also added a new condition in our application, which is to tie our SUP to the noise ordinance. We're confident that this sort of operation doesn't produce the sort of noise that's going to bother neighbors. Next slide. We do have plans back from our engineer, George Butler and Associates at Kansas City. They have prepared our engineering documents. You can see the decel and XL lanes. You can see the left turn lane. We're committed to making all these improvements. There is a question about when these improvements occur. Staff has made clear that they want these improvements to occur before we get batch plant operations up and running. We totally understand why and respect their position on this. Our position is that if you want us to start serving the community for the 2023 construction season, we'd be happy to start that and do these improvements contemporaneously. It's just a matter of these 3 or 4 months of the summer where we can get up and running, we could save some money, and we can commit to giving you these improvements as we get this batch plant off and running. It's a decision that you all can make. It's a decision that the city commission could make. We can leave it at that for now. Of course, if you have any questions, let us know. I would note that our traffic study does conclude that the current configuration and improvements at the intersection are adequate for our current traffic and for our future traffic. Our improvements make it safer, and we're committed to making them. I would also like to note that putting a batch plant at this location doesn't necessarily increase concrete traffic, doesn't necessarily have an impact on demand. We know that the demand is high. We know that the demand is going to increase. One of the primary batch plants that's supplying the city of DeSoto is along 83rd Street. So a lot of this traffic is going to be there whether or not we put a batch plant at this location. A lot of this traffic is going to increase. It's about where the origin from the traffic comes from. There's a lot to consider here. We don't see a site like this very often. It has great buffers. It's clearly intended for industrial uses like this. We think this is an opportunity for the city to add a resource that could be used by its community. We're happy to allow any individuals out to the site, answer any questions. We'll stand for questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Commissioners, do you have any questions at this point for the applicant? Oh, yeah. Yeah. So the recommendation of staff is that this is a discussion item for the planning commission with a public hearing, and that they would suggest that we would table at the end of that to give them additional time to talk. It sounds like the applicant's sort of that same view. So if we're in agreement, that's what we're doing here, then I think it's perfectly appropriate to open the public hearing, and let's begin the comments. So if anyone would like to address the planning commission on this particular application, please come to the podium, give us your name and address.
Darrell Zimmerman, 34055 West 86th Terrace, DeSoto. We've talked about the batch plant, the trucks after they, well, I'll call them ready mix trucks after they're filled and they're coming and going. But concrete ready mix is more than sand and water. It's gravel, which in many cases is limestone crushed and delivered, and of course the cement powder itself. I'm curious about how many vehicles are going to be involved in bringing a coarser aggregate in. I know there's some that they will get when they separate the sand out. There'll be some gravel, but I don't know whether it would be adequate for all their needs, or they'd have to bring in additional amounts. And that, of course, would be by truck, and it would be utilize more traffic. Thank you.
Thank you. On that point, I believe the applicant suggested that they would increase, asking for permission to increase truck traffic from 115 to 175 trucks a day.
That's our request. It's really intended to address the real heavy construction season. And the way it's written in the 2017 permit is that it's an average of 115. We're asking, once these improvements get made to the intersection, to increase that to up to 175.
So I'm assuming those additional 60 trips per day would include bringing material to the site as well, so you can batch it.
Certainly some of them,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you. Please, approach the podium.
Appreciate the opportunity to address the commission. And these three gentlemen did come over to our home and kind of discuss this whole scenario and the projects.
I'm sorry, name and address.
Don, yeah, I was getting that, sorry. Don Minter, my wife and I own 31010 West 83rd Street. So it's within 1,000 feet of the proposed site, and our concerns are pretty simple. The increased traffic, seems like our little oasis is shrinking. You know, we've already seen increased traffic on 83rd Street, and we're right off of 83rd Street. You know, we've been there 11 years, and now we got something coming up behind us. So we got 2 beautiful acres, love it, raised 5 kids here. Just very concerned with the truck traffic and the noise. You know, operation starting at 2 o'clock. You know, I know they say it's not a lot of noise, but we're not really going to know until it happens. So we're worried about property values. We're getting close to retirement. You know, we want to live here another 20 years and, you know, have a second house at Table Rock and be able to come back to this oasis. So we're just concerned with the noise, the traffic, and, you know, the noise behind us. Yeah, all year. So, you know, I know the trees will hide some of the noise during the summer and spring, but in the wintertime, what happens then? So we're worried about property values, worried about the noise, and losing seems like our green spaces are decreasing. Thank you for listening. Appreciate it.
Anyone else?
Hi, my name's Mike Caldwell. I live at 8412 Corliss, but I own property at 30900 West 83rd, which is the western end of the affected zone. And yeah, I've got the same concerns Don does. Noise-wise, you know, the application goes into how they're going to adhere to the ordinance, which I believe is, 85 decibels during the day and 75 at night. But I think the cement batch plant is a game changer. And I'm not confident that the noise will be that low. It's going to start 2 in the morning, 7 days a week. The sand dredging's going on 6 days a week. So I looked at our noise ordinance. I don't know if it really addresses this constant level of background noise. So I'm worried about that. In addition, the truck traffic and the safety on 83rd Street. They mentioned that it's going to go from 115 visits up to 175, which in my mind is really 350, because, you know, one visit's coming and going. That's a lot of vehicles, and when they're loaded, they're 85,000 pounds. 83rd Street is problematic. Curves, hills, a lot of driveways, a lot of roads that don't have any lights or anything. I mean, Corliss traffic has increased, Arbor Ridge going in and out. These trucks are going to be going all through there. Down 83rd, Lexington, you know, do we want to see this going down Lexington Street? I don't know. We got to think about it. We also got to think about do we also need a stoplight at this Gardner Road? It was also mentioned lowering the speed limit. You know, do you lower it from the city limits on in, just make it 35 the whole way? The stoplight at Kill Creek's done a good job of breaking up the flow in traffic so that you can get out of the driveways when the traffic's coming from the west, but coming from the east, there's nothing breaking it up. So it's been difficult. And then lastly, I don't see anything in the application where, I mean, the way I'm looking at it, there's going to be a lot more maintenance needed for 83rd Street. And I think myself and the rest of the taxpayers are the guys that are going to be on the hook. Unless we can think out of the box and do a little negotiating, I mean, it's easy to identify who's benefiting from this. Do they have to pay something per truck? I don't know. Maybe there's legal issues around that. I don't know. But, it's pretty easy to get a truck count and a weight. And, I'm not asking them to foot the whole bill, but there ought to be a little, I shouldn't have to pay for a publicly traded company that what they're trying to do is maximize shareholder value. And, that's what they have to do. That's their job. But I think it's the city job to kind of look at it from the other side and help us out. And that's the kind of stuff you need to protect us from. So thanks for the time.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other comments?
Hi, my name's Crystal with a K, Klebenstein, and I live at 8210 Corliss, so I'm pretty close in proximity to the proposed
I'm sorry, Crystal, your last name was again?
Klebenstein. I can spell it if needed. But, I agree with the comments regarding 83rd Street. I feel like with the residential homes increasing up 83rd Street, it's creating already quite a bit of traffic for a road that's very old and needing improvements. And my biggest concern is that our elementary school is on the other side of 83rd Street, on the other side of this proposed plant where they're going to be increasing traffic, regardless of this plant, but additional because of the residences that are coming up down the road. And, hypothetically, there's a car accident. There's not a great alternative route to 83rd Street to get to his school. So we could be jammed up in 83rd Street in a big bind without a way to get around with a 2-lane road the whole way. And again, the curves, the hills, the speeders, people walking, animals, it's all pretty hard right now, safe-wise. You really have to be alert, and there's a lot of people that are not on that road. And then my other comment question is, why are they changing it from 6 days a week to 7? It looks like if you did the math on that, the 115 per day for 6 days is 690 trips. And then if you do the 175 times 7, that's 1,225 trips. So it's actually almost doubling the amount of trips for the week. So that's something else to consider. And then I guess I was a little confused about the 2 a.m. start time, 5 p.m. stop time, because they also mentioned the 30 minutes before sunrise, 30 minutes after sunset. So how does those two things equally hold a position, and what's the difference, I guess? So, yeah, that's what I got.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think the issue on the timing is their existing special use permit is 30 minutes before dawn to 30 minutes after, and they're asking to change that to 2 a.m. to 5.
If I may. We are asking for the adjustment only for the batch plant. We don't intend to change the hours of operation for dredging. It's only to get that batch plant up and running during crucial times of the year.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments?
I just, Barry Zimmerman, 32215 West 95th Street. I just had a question. So on the traffic, when you say 175, is that 175 round trips? Or is that in one, out two? Is that how that count's done?
I think it's,
I understood it times 2.
yeah, it's probably times 2. It's 175 trips to and from. So, yeah, it's times 2.
Okay, so
Yeah. I think that's what the traffic study said.
Be happy to just confirm, yeah, these are full trips in and out, so that's 1. We do have a traffic study, it is in our application, and they did count cars on 83rd Street. We know how many cars are going up and down that, And we could do, an exercise of determining how much traffic this site would contribute, but we started it and it's, we're talking about, even on our most intensive days, we're talking about 1% and 2%. It's just a heavily traveled road. It's a critical corridor for the city.
We're aware.
Okay.
Any other comments? Okay, at this time, I would like to entertain a motion to table the public hearing so that we can bring this up to the next meeting once you've had an opportunity to, staff's had the opportunity to fully vet the application with the applicant.
Do we have an opportunity to ask
We
questions?
can talk about that, but I'd like to, at the public hearing at this point, I think we ought to table it so that we can then have discussion.
Make a motion, we table the public hearing?
Second.
Moved and seconded? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign? Okay. Consider the public hearing tabled.
Yeah, so for clarity, the public hearing remains open. So at the next council, or next planning commission meeting, the public will have additional opportunities to give.
Thank
So,
you for
now the
clarification.
matter's before the commission. Do you have comments that you'd like to share with staff and as part of this negotiation and dealing with the applicant?
My primary concern is around traffic. Those are where all my questions are. Crystal, I think you and I apparently looked at the same math sheet. So check my math here, but right now, on a summer day when there's 12 hours of daylight, we'll say, that's a truck every 9.5 minutes times 6 days a week. With your proposed change, that'd be a truck every 4 minutes times 7 days a week. And in the less daylight hours, I've got a truck every 2 minutes at the current limit and a truck every 1.37 minutes at the max at the proposed. So to me, that seems like an awful lot. One of the concerns that I have is I have a couple of teenagers who are driving to DeSoto High School, and I know a lot of their friends come from Western Shawnee, and they cannot pay attention to anything. And I'd be worried about the inability to navigate around some of that truck traffic is where my concern kind of lies. So I have not read your traffic study in any depth or detail, but my question is have you guys kind of vetted the demographic of the drivers that are going to be on that road?
I think I may have seen your kids out there one time. Let us sharpen the pencil on this. We're not sending trucks in every minute or two, but we can look at this and we can get with staff on that. Obviously, we know that there's some residences along 83rd Street. We can do what we can to make sure that we have given as refined and limited application as possible.
So I guess I don't know if it's a question, but a concern, but so are we trying to approve a update to the current SUP and then add another SUP for the concrete? So is there two, or is it just one including the batch plant?
That's something we can take up with staff as well. I mean, the way I think I characterize it in our application is that we have an existing SUP. It goes from 2017 to 2027, and we are not going to impact that. We're applying for a new SUP with essentially the same terms, but we're adding the batch plant to it. And if we're approved, we'll start that new SUP. If we're denied, does not impact our existing SUP. So
On that point, I think what you have here is you have an application for a new SUP, and secondarily, you have a request for an extension of an existing SUP. I don't think those are, I think those are two separate things. You want to preserve the old SUP.
but in the event that you're able to grant us a new one, we have no concern over that. I mean, we can terminate that old one, but it's probably a technical question that staff can resolve with us, and we can clarify that at the next meeting. I think it's 6 one way, half dozen the other.
Yeah, because I guess, I couldn't explain I'll be honest, I can't explain what you're trying to do with overlaying, changing extending it and then changing the times and then adding the batch plant and then talking about noise and then we're talking about the batch plant.
Well, and the reason I say they're two is because they're separate uses. And you have a special use permit for a concrete batch plant, you have a special use permit for your mining operation. And they are two different special uses. So you may modify your existing special use permit through this process, but that's separate from the question of how you're gonna handle the batch plan. And I
Okay.
think that's the right way to look at it.
Yes, yes, exactly.
We'll certainly get clarity on that from staff.
Okay. Any other comments? Obviously, you'll see this again.
My main concern is the traffic safety, the number of trucks that's gonna be going up and down 83rd Street, because going east, 83rd Street is turning into a very nasty road. Lenexus fixed a few places on it, but it's not in really great shape. Coming west, well, basically the whole thing is Old 10 Highway from whenever. It's still got that original base underneath it, the extra traffic, the heavier trucks. It's not gonna do it any good. There's a couple of places that I believe are starting to sink in. The noise issue, the decibels may be fine during the day. Noise travels a long way at night. The trains that go across the river at 2 o'clock in the morning sound like they're right in front of my house if I've got the windows open. So the decibels there, I don't know if there was a stipulation on some of these places where the people have concerned if there'd be a decibel meter able to be installed to check that as part of a condition or something. I mean, I'm bringing this up because I won't be able to be at the next meeting, so I wanted to get some of this addressed.
Yep.
Same things. I worry about the increase on traffic. We're already, and even with the traffic study, you know, we've got all the new houses up at Lenexa at the top of the hill, and not to mention our new plants that are going in. I'm concerned about the wear and tear on the roads too. And the sound, 2 o'clock in the morning, I wouldn't want to be right down there having even if it's just a hum going by your house at 2 o'clock in the morning. I mean, we hear the traffic from where we live, so I understand the same concerns.
The traffic study that was done on 83rd was, that looked like it was a daily. Was there anything looked at from an hourly perspective? Because I think it ebbs and flows pretty heavily based on, you know, your normal traffic hours. And do you, to that end, do you guys have any flexibility within, obviously you can't predict demand, but do you have any flexibility within your operational schedule to sort of work around the busier hours?
Yeah, I think the operations they start in the morning, and that's when the concrete trucks start to line up. And so I think you can expect that most of the traffic is going to be early, and then during heavy construction season, it'll be a little more regular. 3/4 of the year, 2/3 of the year, I think you're talking about a much less, you know, much lower demand on the concrete batch plant. And that's really the distinction here. We do have the ability to mine and extract sand right now, and we don't expect that demand to really change. So we're just really talking about concrete batch, and so mornings, and particularly seasonally.
I mean, it sounds like traffic is the big concern, but I do want to say that, I mean, they did the traffic study. There are cities recommending putting in the accel lane and decel lane, and then the applicant is going to put in the turn lane, the eastbound left turn lane. So those improvements are there to help mitigate some of those concerns. I mean, traffic is still a concern of mine, but that's what those improvements are for, is to mitigate some of those turning movements from the trucks.
That's right. It was talked about in 2017 and forecasted as part of that SUP. It is going to be the applicant's cost to do both the XL and decel lanes and the turn lane.
Mhm.
In addition to that, we are agreeable to improving Gardner Road going north a good portion of the way. I think these are in excess of $500,000 worth of public improvements that the applicant would be providing.
So my 2 cents, I mean, you know, I think we need to look at the context of the sound ordinance. And I think there is probably a good question of whether a sound ordinance contemplates a constant sound whether that might be different. That's probably worthy of considering. And I don't really know what sounds would be admitted from this kind of process, but, you know, I did hear the gun club tell me that I shouldn't be able to hear them shooting, and I hear them shooting every Sunday morning. You sounds like fully automatic weapons to me. So.
I hear them on my front porch, so
The noise absolutely travels. So I think it's very important that give due consideration to the noise issue. I mean, the traffic 83rd Street, guys, the reality is it needs to be rebuilt. And it needs to be built in a way that allows for everybody to use that property, that street. We've been putting it off forever, and someday we're gonna have to do it. I mean, I get it. But I don't know if this is necessarily the tipping point that says we have to do it tomorrow. Any other comments?
I just wanted to say I apologize because your traffic study's actually got it by hours, so I'll review it. Probably answer most of my questions in here, so thank you.
Okay, then I think we're ready to entertain a motion to table this for future discussion.
make that motion to table it.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Seeing no opposition, we'll consider the matter tabled. Thank you.
Thank you.
I believe that concludes the public hearing portion of our business. But we still have more if you want to hang out. No old business on the agenda, but under new business, to consider a site plan for Phase 3 for Panasonic.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. What you have before you is the Phase 3 site plan, for the Panasonic battery plant. We do have Carl Walton here tonight with Panasonic, and then also SSOE, who is the design engineer for the site, for the building itself, and submitted the site plan documents to me for this meeting. We've already approved the first two phases, which were basically the site itself, the entrance egress issues, road transportation issues, circulation, things like that, parking spaces. The second was the architectural plans that showed the building, the color schemes, the window locations, the window coverage, things like that. And then finally, the last one is the landscape plan, and the photometric plan, and then also there is a proposed sign for the project as well. Really, we reviewed the photometric plan. It does meet our criteria. There aren't any foot candles leaving the site. There is a couple diagrams in the back of the document that show where those foot candles are, and then also there's actually, interestingly, a night view of the site where we'll you can see where the illuminated locations are for the photometrics. And then finally, the landscape plan is very similar to what was proposed at the meeting when we got a presentation on the item. One thing that is not in the site plan that is in your condition, that we didn't get a detailed plant schedule. That's something we require from our site plan in the city code, and also like to have an irrigation plan just to show what areas are irrigated. And so that's part of one of the conditions that we have. There are a couple remaining items, is the public improvement plans will still need to be submitted and approved by the city engineer. And then also we want to clarify the traffic patterns on 103rd Street. They did update the traffic analysis, and Chet can speak to those issues. We do feel like it's adequate for the project. So at this point, staff's recommending to approve the Phase 3 site plan, which is landscaping, photometrics, the one sign that's in there. And with that, I'll stand for any questions you may have.
Brad, I'm going to lead off on this one. This is the last and final phase of approving of the site plan, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And I believe we approved the previous two phases conditioned upon all three phases being done. So I suppose if there's anything to talk about, now's the time.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is the time to do it.
Questions for staff?
Well, I mean, I guess my major concern is number one. I mean, I don't really see a detailed plan. I mean, are we gonna see that again, or that's a staff thing?
At this point, we're saying it's a staff approval item, and that's a condition. Now, the plant schedule, because we've talked about those several times, Justin, on some of your submittals, that is something that we're going to require. And it's for a lot of reasons. One is for our building inspectors to go out and they'll go out and tag plants and make sure they're actually put in, and they're put in the way they're supposed to be put in. I guess the part of the problem is the enormity of this project and putting together a plant schedule, which could literally have thousands of plants and species and all those types of things, will take quite a bit of work. And so that's why it's a conditional approval. Granted, they had 2 months, but still I would just imagining the significance and the amount of detail for each area, because they've actually broken it up into phases. They got the meadow, they've got more buffering types of areas, they got native plant areas, they've got some ornamental areas. So it's quite extensive as far as the types of plants that will be installed. And so I do think it's fair to just approve the site plan with a condition of submitting this plant schedule at a later date. And that would be for staff approval. I guess we could make the condition that it comes back to the planning commission if that would make you feel more comfortable. But ultimately, the goal is to be complete with the site plan process after this meeting, except for some of the conditions that need to be met.
Brett, I didn't see any comment you made on the lighting plan.
I just said it meets our criteria. That's just, something that we look to make sure the foot candles don't fall off the site.
Well, I guess that's what I was wondering. I mean, so is our criteria basically that the light is to be contained on the property? How do we test that? I don't even remember what we said.
Well, in essence, that is how it works. The light itself, the footprint, so to speak, of the light stays on the property. It doesn't mean you won't see it from, a half mile away, driving up to the location, but the glare, if you will, the actual light itself stays on the property, is contained on the property.
I mean, from this, I had no way to know whether that was tested or you vetted it, or, are we good with their proposal?
Well, I guess, yeah, I'm certainly not an expert in photometrics. I mean, I have looked at a lot of these photometric plans even prior to working for the city of DeSoto. And they all look very similar. It seems to check out with everything that I have seen previously. I guess that's the one thing I like calling your attention to, the illumination plan that they have on the back that shows the sort of the nighttime version of that. I had not seen one of those laid out like that before. So that's sort of what I mean when I talk about the footprint of the light. That's where it stops. Doesn't mean you won't see it from somewhat of a distance away, but as far as the illuminated area, it stays on site.
So, Chairman, to further that, so one of these plans in here shows foot candles, how we measure it. The lumens are measured in foot candles. We have maximum and minimums for parking lots. This, I think it's the second to the last sheet that you have in your packet. Probably too small to read, we printed off, but the digital version, you can zoom in and not see the foot candle throughout the parking lot, throughout the property.
Clearly, that was the mistake I made, because I printed it off and I'm like.
You can zoom in enough to see that they do meet those foot candle limitations throughout the parking lot, throughout the facility.
Okay. Well, I don't know what else we can do. I mean, obviously, you don't want to create some giant low on the horizon if we can avoid it, but it sounds like you guys probably don't want to either.
Mm-hmm.
I think in the past, really the only It comes down to a compliant and enforcement issue, you know, if, after the facility's built, we had an example where, the residential, or a commercial strip was built with wall pack lights that kind of created glare across the street. It's pretty obvious, we got to install a shield on that, so. There are meters you can get to go around and test it after the fact, so it is enforceable.
Okay.
Sure is.
Oh, I mean, obviously, we're not backing right up to a residential subdivision that people are gonna have this coating in their backyard. I mean, that's a pretty safe place to have extra glow. That said.
Yeah, and one thing also that this doesn't show, Mr. Chairman, is that, you know, the grades out there, the road actually is quite a bit higher than what the parking lot will be, so so any kind of potential glare, even if the study is a little bit inaccurate, will still not reach beyond any residential areas that have been approved in that area.
That said, now that you put things out of the ground, I'm surprised how tall that building is. It's like, you know, I realized you dug down quite a ways, but it's still, it's up there. Like, wow.
80 minus 20, it's still 60.
I know, right? Just doesn't seem like it until you see it. Like, wow.
What's going up is the tallest end of the building. Yes.
Okay, well, there you go.
It gets shorter.
We're not used to that in DeSoto,
Well, I didn't know you could see it from K-10. That was surprising. Any other questions or discussion? I mean, as far as the listing of the plants, I'm sure as heck not gonna look at that. So if you're okay with it, I'm okay with it. And whatever you need to make sure that your building inspectors can ensure they're doing what they're supposed to do. I'd leave
Yeah,
that to
I
staff.
think we can handle that, but it's up to planning commission's purview to request that.
I didn't quite understand your comment on the traffic patterns at full access onto 103rd Street. What are we talking about? What are we missing?
Okay, Chet, I'll let you handle that.
Yeah, good evening. The full access at 103rd Street is actually only at Astra Parkway. The access directly to 103rd Street, they call it a three-quarter access. So there'll be a left in to the site and a right in and a right out. So there won't be any place where you can turn left out of the plant onto 103rd to go westbound.
And you just need to see the detail on that?
We've worked with the engineer since the beginning of that, and they're incorporating that design in with the 103rd Street project that KDOT's doing.
But the condition here is clarify the traffic patterns at the full access onto 103rd Street, including ingress and egress points. That's still a valid comment. We still need that in here as part of the approval.
It may just need to modify that to be the three-quarter access at 103rd Street.
So clarify traffic patterns for three-quarter access?
Yeah, yep.
Thank you. Okay. Anybody else?
I guess I understand the enormity of this project, how big it is, and I guess the only heartburn that I have on the landscape plan is that it's supposed to approve a concept plan, and I don't know, just me as an engineer wants to, but I understand, I mean, yeah.
So I can speak to that. So Dan Bromley, Senior Project Manager.
I'm sorry, I have to ask you to
Yeah.
approach the podium.
Thanks, because I can't hear either.
So I'm Dana Brumley, Senior Project Manager with SSOE. I'm the design manager for the project. Our intent with that plan, it took us quite a bit actually to develop that as a concept. We are currently in the process of working with local landscape architects to complete that plan with the plantings. So we're going through that process now because we wanted someone that was actually here, local to the area, that was familiar with the plantings and with that, so that we can develop that in a way that's going to be sustainable for the facility and for the community. So that's part of the reason why it is a concept, and it is a very large site, and it's a process to go through that and find the right landscape architect, which is what we're attempting to do right now. So we're more than happy to present that final planning, whether it comes before the commission or if it's addressed with staff. We understand that there's a lot of visibility on this project, and we do want to do it correctly. But but we also didn't want to hurry it and do something that we might want to have to adjust later.
So you're not getting your palm trees, Justin.
No.
I like the native grasses. That was impressive.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess we have as an option to do a condition that is subject to final review of the final landscape plan.
I'm fine with staff doing it. I just wanted to.
I personally don't want to see it again, but that's me.
Okay.
Whatever works for everybody else. You know me in landscape. I like it. But be over my head with this
Well,
much.
there's a lot of trees there.
Yeah, there is. That's what I said. It'd be over my head with this amount, so it's fine.
Yes, and part of understanding that there is a lot of trees there is that, you know, we've got to make sure that we can actually get all the plants that we need for the site. And so that's why it's going to take us a bit to get there.
So will it go in phases if you can't get as many trees as you need?
There is a potential for that. If that were the case, then we would look to address those items that take care of the screening. A large part of the landscaping plan is screening of areas and things like that. So that would obviously be a priority area, and potentially build out towards the public access ways from that.
I guess we would maybe want something built in saying that there was a time frame so that it wouldn't just lag forever to get it done.
And our intention would be not to have to go that way, but
Sure.
there is always a potential because it is a very large site.
Yes, absolutely.
Supply chain.
Supply chain, I understand, but I also understand
Yeah.
deadlines
Yeah.
too.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
kind of encourages folks.
With that many trees, there's only certain
I know.
number in
Well,
the
they can
area.
come dig some up out of our yard. A little baby.
Yeah.
Probably wouldn't work.
No.
Thank you very much, appreciate it.
So maybe something, an additional comment on approval of this would be that if phasing is required in the final landscaping plan, then staff would be required to present that back to the commission for approval.
I think that would be fair.
Okay. Right, what else?
Looks good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
So the matters before the commission for discussion. Any further discussion on this item? I believe what we're looking to do is approve phase 3. And when we do that, I suppose we've actually no longer have conditional approval of phase 1 and phase 2 because this will not be coming back to us. Which is, I believe we approved phase 1 and 2 conditional upon completing phase 3. So if there's anything else you want to talk about on this, this is kind of your chance to do it. Any further discussion?
I can't think of anything. I'm sure 5 minutes after we adjourn, I think, but.
I know, right? So this is a final decision by the commission. It does not go to city council on approval of the phase 3 of the site plan, which would include complete approval of all 3 phases. We have 3 conditions that have been suggested by staff. A 4th that I just threw out there, that if phasing is required for a final landscaping plan, then staff shall present to the commission for approval.
I like adding that.
If no further discussion, I suppose we're looking for a motion.
I'll make a motion, we approve just what you said. Did you get that, Brandon?
I have the 3 suggested conditions, and then the 4th is if phasing of the landscaping plan is required. Staff shall present a plan to the planning commission for final approval.
You good with that?
I'm good with that.
You need to modify 3 to say 3/4 access.
Yeah, and 3 would be modified to say 3/4 axis.
3/4 access? Okay, thank you.
I would second that motion.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, call for a vote. Roll call.
Maddock,
Yes.
Templin,
Yes.
Lane,
Yes.
Milburn,
Yes.
Schultz.
Yes.
Motion carries.
I believe that completes our agenda for tonight.
And just as a reminder, I will not be at the next meeting.
Well, you'll be missed.
I will be in New York.
New York.
Yeah.
Motion to adjourn.
Make a motion, we adjourn. Second.
Moved, seconded. No objection?
No objection.
We're adjourned. Thank you.
Yes. 7:42 p.m. That means I get to go home. Oh, no basketball tonight. I missed that.
What?
No basketball tonight.
Good job, thank you.
Yeah.
Good job.
How are you?
I'm new. Nice to meet you.
The Lakers got the butts kicked.
I know.
Yeah, I'm a big Lakers fan. That was embarrassing.
Congratulations, thank you. Good looking, working. Yeah. That's good to hear. When's it gonna be done? Done.
Yeah.
We're excited. Thank you.
God, no.
Yeah, LeBron had help.
Yeah, he had a hell of a game, but man, nobody else was helping.
I'll tell you what, that guy on the Nuggets, Jovic,
Yeah.
those like 2-second threes he did, like.
Yeah. He's a freak, man. When you get your butt beat that bad, it's just like, yeah, they're better too. I'm not even bad.
He's just, I mean, he's really tall, he's 7 feet tall. He's so guard.
Yeah. Look crazy. It's like, it kind of reminds me like a young Kevin Durant. When Kevin Durant first came in the league and he was shooting those threes, he was probably a little more accurate.
Yeah, that guy is. Yeah. Yeah. But he'll just go, I mean, give him the ball. Give him the ball.
Yeah.
They couldn't stop it.
Yeah.
So I lived in, my dad lived in,
But, they started off like 2-10. Western Conference.
Really? Yeah, I lived in Gresham.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good run. Then if Miami wins tonight, I mean, it's like.
Oh, there's battles. Like, Florida May's playing tonight. I'm all about Joe Butler all the time. That dude is just willing this time. Like, he's just going.
I was kind of disappointed to see, I was disappointed to see Philly lose because.
I like Joel.
Yeah. But then Braun, he's on Denver.
Yeah. Christian
Well,
Braun.
yeah, Oregon is just overcast all
He's
year.
actually playing well.
Then that one guy, who's that walk on the Lakers?
Warren Walker.
What's that, Arkansas?
Yeah, no, it was Walker, right? It's got a W.
Yeah.
Well, you're used to that.
We'll see what happens. Next year, LeBron might retire. That'd be very disappointing.
Thank you.
Charles, how are you?
Thank you. Appreciate you guys being patient with us.
Yep, so yeah.
For some reason, I can't, when I print these up, I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but I'm getting them good. I'm shorting myself like a couple pages. Is it against the rules if I brought a laptop in and if I just followed along? Okay. I was gonna ask, but I'm more of an electronic guy.
No, most people, so if you watch the city council,
Yep.
there's nothing. I would say the only thing is you're not really supposed to be like, you shouldn't be like messaging
Right.
Justin.
Right.
while you're
Yeah.
sitting on your
Yeah.
laptop.
I did pull my phone out to do some math, because I was
Yeah.
trying to figure out how many trucks per minute. you know?
Yeah, that's the only thing, you might get, if, when you do stuff like that, like, people could accuse you of like having a side meeting, but as long as you're transparent about it.
Okay.
Yeah, we hear you.
Good. That will help me.
I hear you. It was a lot, it was like 153 pages.
Well, yeah, and my, so I printed it at work, and my printer just like died. I was like, oh, man.
Yeah.
But thanks, guys. Have a good, oh.
Memorial Day is coming. Memorial
It
Day,
is.
yeah.
I am going out of the country, so
Good for
first
you.
time I've taken my wife